This is the second lecture on fungi from chapter 14, and picking up with talking about how then can we find fungi in so many different habitats. So the thing that makes it so that we find fungi so many places is because so many of them are decomposers. So the big advantage of being a decomposer is that pretty much everywhere you're going to be able to find food. Think about it. If there are other organisms around, there are going to be dead organisms around, and there's going to be waste like feces around. And if that's what you're going to be eating, you're always going to be able to find food. They don't need light, so they can be found just about anywhere. Unlike plants who are required to have light, these guys don't need it. So they can be found under things, in deep water, and so forth. Those hyphae, the things that make up the mycelium, those help a lot because again, they allow them to have large surface area and get into nooks and crannies. So they allow them to be able to absorb as much food and water as they can from the area that they're living in. And because of all of this, the fungi play a huge role in their environment. So they have this big ecological role, this big ecological job, because a good number of them are decomposers. Just like a lot of bacteria are decomposers, they are working together, both the fungi and the bacteria, to break things down. So they are breaking down those dead organisms, the feces and so forth, whether it's animals or plants, but what they're doing is recycling the nutrients. So these guys are going to work to return things like carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus and other things, the smaller minerals like calcium and things like that, back into the soil and the water so that they're available for the plants to be able to take back up and turn back into food for everybody else. Or the carbon will be returned back into the atmosphere so that it can be absorbed as carbon dioxide by the plants and again be made into food. So incredibly, incredibly important. Also, a lot of the fungi can work to break down cellulose, break down plants, and that's very important because there aren't a lot of organisms that can eat that. And so they are very helpful as far as breaking down things like trees. That's part of why you find a lot of these growing inside of dead trees. So fungi are incredibly important to the environment, but they can be a problem. Just like bacteria, we have lots of good bacteria, but there are a few that are a problem. Same thing with fungi. There are a few of them that cause problems for us. So the first one is to look at sick building syndrome. This is where you get a fungal invasion into a building of human construction. So what you're seeing here is someone who is testing for different molds and fungi. Some of it's very obvious. You can see it growing here on the wall behind them, some over here as well. And so these molds and fungi can contaminate buildings that aren't well ventilated. So this is actually above ground. We commonly will also see this below ground. And so why is this a problem? Well, a good number of these molds can cause allergies, so they can cause respiratory issues, but some of them are actually they can be quite dangerous because there are certain ones that are toxic. So you may have heard of toxic black mold. It can create compounds that are actually dangerous for individuals to inhale. So what are they eating? Because they are decomposers, so the poor ventilation is building up moisture for them, but what are they eating? Well, in this instance, what they're eating is the paper that is part of the drywall. You may not be familiar with drywall, but drywall is two sheets of paper that surround mineral. So this whole center part is mineral gypsum, but those sheets of paper are dead trees. And so the mold can grow on that and eat the dead paper. And so that's what they're feeding on. Sometimes too, there may be organic matter like hair or skin cells, things like that. But very often they're just growing on that paper from the drywall that, is part of our construction. They can also feed on things like the woodwork and so forth. So that's what you're seeing some of this down here. So there is plenty of food in our buildings for them to be able to eat. There are also fungal parasites for humans as well as other organisms. So there are fungal parasites for frogs. There is a major one called catricid fungus that is actually contributing to the extinction of some frog species and other amphibians. But we do have our own fungal parasites. If you have it, it's called a mycosis. There are different types of fungal infections, and you're seeing pictures of those down here. I know this one's kind of gross. What you're seeing here, this is someone's mouth, and so what you're seeing in the back of their mouth is called oral thrush. So these are the yellow parts are patches of this fungus growing on the back of someone's throat. You also have over here athlete's foot. So if you want to see what that one looks like, here is my stuffed animal version. This is what the athlete's foot looks like as a microbe. And then I've got the little picture here. You can see it's just kind of stringy and strangly. So athlete's foot, what's happening here with athlete's foot as well as with ringworm is this is one of those parasites that's feeding on living tissue. Same with thrush. You can see with the thrush there's lots of red irritated tissue. If you've ever had athlete's foot, you know same thing, it itches and it kind of hurts, and that's because you can see in this picture there's kind of a ring. That ring is the active fungus where it's growing and eating skin. Same thing with ringworm. That's actually why it's called ringworm. It's a false name because it's a fungus, but it looks like a ring of a worm. And the ring section is the active growing fungus. These conditions, you can get rid of them. There are medications to treat them. They're a little more difficult to treat than something like a bacterial infection because these are a little more related to us. But they are treatable and they are preventable, especially things like ringworm and athlete's foot, because these two prefer places that are darker, damp, right? And so you may be aware, some people are aware, ringworm is common in wrestlers. Because they've got, damp equipment from sweating and so forth. And it's a contact sport, so that's easily transferred. Athlete's foot, this is common in adults. It's much more common in adults than it is in children. If you've ever been around kids, what's the first thing that kids do when they come inside or even go outside? That's right. They take off their shoes and usually their socks too. The thing is that these fungi thrive in warm, damp places. Well, if you don't have shoes on, they can't thrive in that, warm, damp. So adults tend to get it more, and men tend to get it more than women. And that is generally because men tend to wear the same pair of shoes over and over more commonly than women do. That's not to say that that's true for everyone, but that's the trend. So they tend to get it more often. All right, so are there any good fungi? Yes, there are tons of them. There are the ones that are out in the environment doing good as far as breaking down and recycling, but there is a major beneficial fungi that and that is penicillin. Yeah, I've got a stuffed one. So this is our little friend Penicillium. Penicillium created our wonder drug, penicillin. So here's penicillium. You can see it's got those stringy hyphae making up a nice mycelium kind of mat. So penicillium, actually we discovered penicillin by accident with this guy. The scientists who discovered it actually found that it grew on his petri dishes, his plates, and was killing bacteria. He didn't actually set out to find it, but then it was tested later and found that it worked really well. Basically, a lot of the microbes that we've seen already, like bacteria, protists, and then this fungi, that the group that penicillium belongs to, they actually have chemical warfare. They fight with each other. And so they create chemicals to kill each other so that they have resources and space to live in. And so that's what penicillin is it's actually a chemical to kill other organisms so that penicillium has some place to live. The other thing that fungi are really good for are for plants. It turns out most of our plants have fungal symbionts, but in this case, they're not parasites. They're actually helping out the plant. So sometimes you might see something like this around a plant's roots, and that's generally a good thing. This webbing is the fungus, and this is what it's doing. It's actually wrapped around the little tiny root hairs, these little tiny structures that plants have to help them absorb water and nutrients from the soil. And they're called mycorrhizae. These are the fungi that live with the plants. What they're doing is really kind of cool. What these fungi are doing is they're pulling extra nitrogen and phosphorus out of the soil and giving it to the plant. They actually never break into the cell membranes. They just touch them and transfer the nitrogen across the cell membrane. In return, the plant sends out to the fungus extra sugar. So the sugar that they make via photosynthesis, they'll send that sugar out to the mycorrhizae. So these fungi are going to get fed by the plant. They're going to get sugar, and in return, they give the plant the nutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus that they need, which is kind of cool. And in fact, it turns out that these symbionts are super important. We found that over 90% of plants actually have these fungal symbionts. And when they are grown without them, they actually don't do as well. So here what you're looking at is a study of the percent of offspring that survived. And this is days since planting. And what we're looking at are two groups. The blue bars are the plants that had parents with mycorrhizae, with that fungus around their roots. The green are plants that didn't have parents, that had parents that didn't have mycorrhizae, no fungi. And if you look what happens over time, for the first 20 days, they're exactly the same. Everybody survives. But when we hit day 47, there's a huge difference now. Half of the non-mycorrhizae, half of the non-fungus parent offspring are alive. We got double the survival, and that continues as you go on. There are also studies that show that plants that have mycorrhizae can grow 2, sometimes 3 times bigger than plants without mycorrhizae. So we know that this makes a big difference in the survival and growth of plants. The other things that I've got to talk about briefly, and I'm going to post the videos for these, are other relationships that fungi have with organisms. So they have that relationship with plants and between plants and fungi. This video will get posted up. This is a relationship between these leafcutter ants and fungi. So you may have heard of leafcutter ants. They chop up these leaves out in the rainforests and take them back to their nest. But the video is going to show you what they're actually doing with it, because despite what you might think, they don't actually eat the leaves. They're doing something actually even much more interesting with it. And so this is actually a beneficial relationship between the fungi and the ants. They both are getting something out of it. The last one is a parasitic relationship where the insects are getting the short end of the stick. So this is another video I will post where you'll see that the insects are being infected by the fungus. So this is the ant This is the fungus. And so this video will show you how this relationship works. I will tell you, because some people will ask, this kind of fungus does not infect humans. This is called cordyceps. They're only found in insects. I believe that there's a video game out there, I think it's The Last of Us, that is based on the idea that this does happen to humans, but this kind of fungus is not infecting humans. So this ends the lectures on fungi.